The music was loud enough to drown out everything: the laughter, the drinks, the endless stream of faces. And that's exactly why Daniel was there, because when the noise stopped, the silence was unbearable. At 28 years old, Daniel hadn't spent a night alone in 3 years. Not one. Every evening was planned. Every weekend was booked. He told himself he was just social, living his best life. But the truth? He was running. Running from the one thing he couldn't escape: himself. It started after his girlfriend left. When the structure of guaranteed companionship vanished overnight, suddenly, Daniel was alone in an apartment in a city where nobody knew his name. The first night of silence nearly broke him. His thoughts got so loud he couldn't breathe. So he called someone, anyone, found a bar, filled the void with noise, and he never stopped. 3 years later, his calendar was a monument to avoidance. Gym, trivia night, dates with strangers. A blur of faces and places and anything that kept him from sitting still. His coworker Sarah noticed. "Dude, when do you just relax?" Daniel laughed it off. "I relax with people. I'm an extrovert." But Sarah's eyes said what she didn't. "No, you're afraid." She was right, because every time Daniel tried to stay home alone, panic whispered, "You're wasting your life. You're disappearing." So he kept running. Then everything stopped. Effective immediately, all employees will work remotely until further notice. Lockdown, stay home, don't see people. Daniel's entire defense system was dismantling in real time. Week 2, 11 p.m. Daniel was pacing his apartment, phone in hand, scrolling desperately. But everyone was exhausted. The texts went unanswered. The calls went to voicemail. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel was completely, unavoidably alone. He sat on his couch, turned off the TV, put down the phone, and the silence hit him like a wave. Thoughts he'd been outrunning for years crashed over him. You have no real friends, just people you distract yourself with. You're 28 years old, and you're terrified of your own company. Daniel grabbed his phone to call someone, stopped, because he realized something horrifying. He had hundreds of contacts, and not a single person he could be honest with. Week 3. Daniel stopped fighting it. What choice did he have? At first, it was excruciating. Memories he'd buried, regrets he'd ignored, questions he'd never answered. But something strange started happening. The longer he sat with the discomfort, the quieter it got, like a storm slowly calming. One night, he opened an old journal. The last entry was from after his breakup. "I don't know who I am without her. I don't know who I am without anyone." He grabbed a pen, started writing. Not for anyone else, just for himself. 3 years of running. 3 years of pretending he was fine when he was drowning. When he finally stopped, something had shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the loneliness. He was listening to it. Slowly, Daniel started doing things he'd forgotten he loved. Reading, cooking, walking without a destination. The loneliness wasn't an enemy anymore. It was a mirror, showing him everything he'd been avoiding. The relationships he'd kept shallow, the dreams he'd abandoned, the version of himself he'd buried. The loneliness wasn't punishing him. It was teaching him. 6 months later, the world opened up again. Daniel's calendar started filling with invitations, but he said no to most of them. Not because he was still afraid, but because he'd learned to choose differently. And when he did see people, it was different. He didn't perform. He showed up as himself, honest, vulnerable, present. Some people drifted away, and that was okay, because the people who stayed, they were real. One evening, Daniel ran into his ex at a coffee shop. They hadn't spoken in 4 years. "You look lighter," she said. Daniel smiled. "I feel lighter." At the end of their conversation, she said something he'd needed to hear for years. "I didn't leave because you weren't enough. I left because you didn't believe you were enough." She was right. He'd spent years trying to prove his worth through other people's presence. But worth doesn't come from being surrounded. It comes from being whole. That night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. The silence used to terrify him. Now it felt like home, because he'd finally learned what loneliness was trying to teach him. You can't run from yourself forever. And when you stop running, you realize you were never as alone as you thought. You were just disconnected from your truth, from your purpose, from the quiet voice inside that knows exactly who you are. Loneliness isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. And the lesson is simple. The relationship you need most isn't with someone else, it's with yourself. If you've ever felt lonely, even when surrounded by people, you're not broken. You're being called to listen. Subscribe for more stories about finding yourself when you stop running, one honest moment at a time.